by coming out to the streets, protesting, championing for their plight, because literally there's no one to represent them, and the people who they thought would represent them are in bed with the government and are in bed with the oppressors. Much as even there are some youth in the government, they live in a scenario where they do not think about the reality. They don't have a connection with the people who are on the ground, and the people who are really suffering are the youth who are unemployed. You know, it's hurting to see somebody who's studied, somebody who has a degree, has a master's, even level of getting a PhD, but they don't have jobs. And the only way the government is able, the only thing that the government does is export the labor market. They don't want to create jobs or meaningful employment for the Kenyans, for the citizens of its country. Another thing is there's unfavorable business environment. Many businesses are shutting down. That is the small, medium, the micro and small, medium enterprises. They are really struggling. And you find that they're being harassed by the revenue authority. They're being harassed by the city municipality and municipality police, or rather tax enforcement agents. They are grappling with theft, they are grappling with robbery, they are grappling with violence, and they want just a peaceful environment. They just want a conducive environment where they're able to work. And you find that the government is not trying to offer this solution, but rather it's politicizing all these problems. And the more the government tries to politicize these problems, it's when chaos continue to breed in, and the people just get angered and they just want to come out the street. And the only solution to this is the government to just listen to the youth. Even in Kenya right now, majority of the youth are tired about dialogues. They're tired about committees, because there are very many task forces and committees. There are many reports in government. They've been written. They're just lying it down somewhere in parliament, and no one is addressing them. And the government is unwilling to take action. The problem is the governments in Africa, they just do talks, but they rather do not perform their actions. And you find that there are very many learned people in this society, that is the young people, who are capable of doing it. Just as I was looking at the stats today in Kenya, the public service, that is one of the most, that is the public service by the government. It's supposed to be, it's deemed to be one of the highest employers in government. And you find that the youth between the age of 18 years to 25 account to almost like less than 5% of the
Faithfulness, Joshua, are you still with us? Unfortunately, we lose you due to connection problems, but then we could cite. Yes, we can hear you. Yes, we can kindly proceed.
Okay, so I was just saying that the workforce, that is the workforce in Africa, or especially in Kenya,
Unfortunately, the connection or connectivity is not really smooth from your end, but hopefully we're going to get back to you or in touch with you for you to proceed with your insightful expertise on today's topic of discussion. Meanwhile, getting to you, HILARY, TITA, you listened to your co-panelist, and he did mention that the government most of the times is probably politicizing problems that occur in different African nations, and that is why it actually turns to protest. He equally said that governments do focus more on talking rather than taking action. And now, as a political scientist, in your opinion, what accounts for these increased protests across the African continent?
At the advent of democratization in Africa, around the 1990s, where most African countries left from military rule to democracies, where most African countries left from one-party systems to democracies. The presidents that were coming in, or the African leaders that were coming in then, had the responsibility to first pay back the debts that the country was owing, and again, institute these democratic processes, institute democratic institutions. Among this era of democratization, we had this aspect of political liberty, which has its advantages and equally has its disadvantages as far as growing the African economy or the African society forward is concerned. Sometimes the citizens have their worries, it's true, but sometimes the load on the leaders as well is quite heavy. And that is why most of the African leaders actually engage into strategic plans. You hear about 3 years plan, 4 years plan, 10 years plan. And somehow every leader has his or her roadmap towards realizing certain projects within his state or within his mandate. If his intentions, let's take for example, the intention of a leader is to, electrify the state within 5 years, and the people have a need, diverse needs of this one wants the internet, the other wants road, the other wants social amenities, and so on. Somehow the task becomes challenging as to whether to attend to individual needs or the leaders should have a strategic plan that they have to follow in order to meet up with the demands of the people. African citizens must understand that every African state exists within the international system, meaning that the state itself has pressures from the international system that it has to attend to. Likewise, the pressures that comes from within, from the citizen. I would not want to say that the uprising of protest movements or protests in the Africa continent is a problem only from the perspective of the leaders. But I equally want to look at it as equally being the problem of the citizen. The citizens themselves are a problem to the same issues that they protest on the street. If I want to look at the current protests in Kenya, I'm happy to be sharing the platform with someone from Kenya. I want to believe that President Ruto came in just 2 years. He has, in one of his manifesto, to pay the over 82 billion debt that Kenya owes, and again make sure that he makes life easy for the hustling community. That is for a very low Kenyan citizen. These things are not done within a twinkle of an eye. And for the leader to succeed, they need money. The state needs money. And if you want to look at it critically again, increasing the prices of basic goods and commodities will equally promote entrepreneurial activities within the Kenyan citizens. This is what I mean. If the government puts money into the pockets of her citizens, the citizens become lazy and only wait to be employed by the government. If the government takes away money from the pockets of the citizens, you no longer have money to buy bread. You go to the farm, you get your cassava, you get your plantains. You've already obtained alternatives to Right. So you will find out that somehow the policies that are being instituted by most leaders, which are often met with resistance by the population, may not be that bad. The vision may be a long-term vision.
Absolutely.
But they are not that bad. So in this case, I would want to blame the leaders in terms of communication, because most African leaders, they don't communicate to citizens. They don't make their vision clear to the citizens. And at some point, the citizens who want to see that it's wickedness. It is the government does not care about them. The government does not care about their desires. When we talk about the government, someone will generally say that we all make up the government. We all make up the state. Who should be the state? Now, getting to the street to destroy state properties, which will still be rebuilt by the taxpayers' money. Is that the solution? I don't think so. Well, I believe that the protest, the uprising of protests on the African continent is a blame that is supposed to be accorded to both the leaders and the citizens. I think I will submit here. Thank you.
Thank you to Hilary, TITA, for that brilliant introduction. Now back to you, Faithfulness. Joshua, now you listen to your co-panelists, but then we could mention that there are different types of demonstrations or protests across the African continent that cuts across the globe. Now, at what point, given you are experiencing it firsthand, at what point do protests, which are always termed peaceful, go violent? Joshua, are you with us? Please, can you unmute your mic?
Okay. I had unmuted my mic, sorry. I can say that the young people who are definitely on the streets do mean well for the country. These are people who want progressiveness. They champion for the better governance, champion for rule of law, champion for human dignity. They champion for fiscal responsibility. These are the people who really care about the country. They do really care about the business owners. They do really care about infrastructure. These are the people who, majority of them, understand that, for instance, if institutions like Parliament, the State House, these are just institutions that are systems, and they do respect that. But they do have a problem with people who are occupying, let's say, these institutions, especially Parliament and, let's say, State House. And for instance, when Kenya, when people stormed the Parliament and wanted to storm the State House, it was just a situation where they wanted to make their voices heard, that literally you guys are messing up these institutions and we want you to own up. So when these protests, especially the picketing, protest, whatever demonstration or picketing, when these people come out to the streets, they do really mean well, and they just want their voices heard, just as I've highlighted. But these protests turn out violent when, one, the police decide to use brutal force, when the police decide to use live ammunitions, when the police decide to use rubber bullets, or rather blank bullets, that would harm the citizens. When the police decide to clobber these people who are armed with just masks, water bottles, and flags. And you find that most of these type of demonstrations that have been happening, especially in Africa and especially in Kenya way before, people termed it as political. They would term it as it's political instigated. But you find that this is an uprising where it's just people who want to just come out to the streets to highlight their plights. They do have their placards and everything, and they don't even really want to beat the police. And you find that they are offering too much restraint, such that even when the police are hurt themselves, it's the same protesters who would go try to make sure that this police is not harmed. So you find that it's the government against its own people. And the situation where the protests turn out violent, it's when, even look at the situation in Kenya. There are some rogue cops who are in civilian. Temporarily, a civilian cop is not supposed to, let's say, harm a citizen or do anything to a citizen. But we find that there are police officers who are in civilian and they do have ammunitions, and they've wrapped their face, they've hid their face, and it's them who are trying to kill, let's say, protesters or harm protesters. And that is when the protests turn out violent. Secondly, you find that in these protests, majority of the people just want to come picket and do their own things. But now, since there are people in government, or let's say there are few people, let's say politicians, who want to make the protest, or rather the government would want to make the protest or paint the protest as a bad thing, that these people are not peaceful, they would send their goons, pay their goons who carry crude weapon and all sort of stuff to just either one, harm the protesters, two, to come lynch the mob, or let's say lynch and fire up businesses and cause rampage, destroy businesses and institutions. And this is when now the police would not care about peaceful protesters, but rather would just shoot aimlessly and use live ammunition. And this is a very gross factor that comes in whenever the protests come in. So for peaceful protests to happen, let there be willingness between the government and both the people to identify who are these masqueraders. But in the real sense is, I want to highlight that even with the protests that I have attended in Kenya, from morning to evening, up to around 4 p.m., the protests that are happening, these are just people, especially the young people who are harmless. They do really care about themselves, and they would not harm anyone. But now those people who want to destroy people's properties, those are just goons who've been paid and just want to destroy the peace and harmony of the citizens. And this is where the police have to step in. And I think the government has been thinking that since they've been handling it politically before, they're going to handle it the same way. And you find that that is when now there are more casualties and people get charged up, they get fired up, and they don't care about anything else. They just want to destroy everything. So there should be a willingness between both the citizens and the people that, look, we are going to have these protests, but you guys, let's say the government, have to protect us, and we are going to protect our institutions, and you guys, and we are going to just offer our petitions. That is the only way we're going to solve all these problems. We are going to reduce brutality. We are going to reduce police brutality. We are going to reduce casualties. We are going to reduce death. And mostly these comes from the police. I think the police need to offer restraint. They need to be caught that, look, we're not here to harm you, but rather we are here to champion for your rights and also look for your welfare. Yeah, that's it.
Absolutely, and you evoke that there is a need for a new approach from the part of the government. We shall be coming back to how we can quell this issue of police brutality on the African continent. But before I dive right into that, I would like to get the opinion of you, Hilary. Now, you listen to your co-panelists in a bit to comprehend what he said. We've seen this issue of police brutality in recent years. I recall 4 years ago, we saw that in Kenya, where the youths, also the population, actually went through the streets. They went out into the streets. They said that police brutality was at its peak, mostly in smaller neighborhoods. Now, looking at we equally saw that in Tunisia, but that was regarded as negrophobic tendencies. Looking at the context of the African continent, what really counts for this phenomenon of police brutality?
The police do not act on their own. They receive orders from elected officials. You know, this issue of protests turned violence on the African continent is equally a problem that is dually, that has a dual responsibility of the leaders and the citizens. When the citizens get to the street, instead of the leaders to listen to them, from the very first beginning an answer to their plea, or at least promise them, you find out that they tend to suppress their views. And then when you look at it from the perspective of the citizens, when the citizens get to the street, there are some gullibles among them that will tend to either cause public disorder. But I think in every republic, there are laws that outline how things should be done. If you were to protest, you take an authorization and you do a peaceful march past. I don't think such a march past will face any police brutality. The problem with the African continent is that people are always fed up. The youth are always fed up. So each time they want to engage into a protest, they feel that the government can only hear them when they start breaking road signs, breaking stuffs, destroying buildings. That is how they think. They always see the African leaders as tyrants that can only hear from a harsh language. Well,
Hillary,
I think that
Hillary, sorry to cut you short.
The issue of police brutality is it's not just peculiar to the African continent. It is either the leaders command them to be brutal or the citizens cause them to be brutal. Sometimes it's difficult to handle a large crowd, which always prompt them to use weapons or live ammunition to curb the uprising situation.
Yeah, but in a bit to better comprehend what your response, could this not be linked to the fact that what your co-panelist was saying, that is more about having talks and less of action? Could we say that maybe the youths, or better still, people get into the streets to protest because they do not get the responses, or better still, what they're expecting from the government?
Yes, it's a problem of talk. They talk a lot and they do a little. That is what we think. Until you get into a leadership position, you will never understand what the load that the leaders actually have. Like I did in my introductory statement, the era of democratization came with political mobilization. And today we are within a context of globalization, where I sit here in Cameroon, see someone in the United States driving in a car, start seeing myself as I should be driving in the same car as that person. I care not to know when did America got independence. How did the leaders manage to build up their society to this state such that you can easily own a car? You know, in the era of globalization where information circulates so easy, we tend to copy a lot of things from outside and feel that we too in our country, we should have a living standard that is the same as someone who is living in Britain. You know, I am not in any case defending the inability of the leaders to meet up with the aspirations of their citizens. But in this case, I want to equally look at the responsibility that the citizens have to take. I equally have to look at the sacrifices that the citizens have to take in order for Africa to move forward. I started in the beginning by saying that if you want to critically look at the finance bill that William Ruto, or that was passed through the Kenyan parliament, it may be in a bid to promote entrepreneurship in the society. So, you know, when life gets tough, people start thinking out of the box. But the question is, why should we only think out of the box to resort to violence? You know, they always say it's only within a problem that an entrepreneur can step up, because he starts looking for solutions, start finding for solutions to a problem. So you may want to look at the bill from that perspective. Increase in taxes. Oh, if my salary is taxed, then to hell with the job, I will go to the farm. We can now begin to look, rather blame the leaders in a sense that the taxes they collect, people cannot see feasible projects they have spent the money on. Because while reading through some news media, you find the Kenyan citizens accusing the leadership that they travel a lot. Let them cut their expenses. Instead of taxing the citizens, cut your expenses, cut the traveling. So it is only from that perspective that you, the citizens, can start equally blaming the leader that you will not take money from us to spend your trips to abroad. Absolutely. Why all the movements will spend lavishly on your trips?
Whereas others live in abject poverty.
Whereas others live in abject poverty. So it is only on that perspective without which it is a corporate responsibility of both the citizens and the leaders to grow Africa. And for Africa to grow within this globalized context, there is a lot the citizens have to sacrifice. One of which is the luxury that we see on television from developed countries. Thank you.
Thank you too. I'll be coming back to that for us to evoke this issue of leadership on the African continent. But then, in the bid to proceed with you, I mentioned earlier on faithfulness, that we're going to be coming back to this issue of police brutality. Now, you listened to your co-panelist and the point of view which he shares. In your opinion, how can we quell this issue of police brutality on the African continent?
I think it all boils down to how the police training is being handled, especially from right onset when they go to their training camps, how they're being taught how to handle citizens. You'd look in the past that the police, that is the police service, is always an instrument of the executive. It's being used by the president and those guys in executive to as a weapon. So the only solution to that is stop the weaponization of the police. And one thing I am really glad that the president ever did was institutionalizing the police, making it independent. For the police force to work, it has to be independent. But now, much as the police has been made independent, there's an issue that needs to be addressed, that those heads, especially the police who are, let's say the Inspector General of Police, the people who, let's say, head the police, they need to understand that this is an independent institution. They need not to be weaponized against the citizens. I mean, they don't have to receive orders from above. They don't have to arrest people. They don't have to abduct people. They don't have to offer excessive, practice excessive force on citizens who are harmless. The only time that they're supposed to use excessive force is when they feel that they're in grave danger, and that is when they're supposed to use excessive force. And you find that the police, most of the police do not understand the language of the United Nations human rights procedures. So they end up brutalizing people, they end up maiming these people, and they end up being puppets of the state. So the only solution to this is one, especially the police who have been found culpable, or rather the police who have caused these maimings and all these abductions and brutality. They need to be brought to book. Let there be an independent institution to investigate all these, and all the perpetrators be brought to book. Because you can't tell me that you're going to arrest the people who, let's say, lead a protest or something and charge them for nothing, and much as you're arresting them with flimsy charges, you're not able to arrest the police who caused all this brutality. So you find that all these police who are on the streets, they always receive orders from above. They want to serve the masters in the executive. They don't want to follow the procedures or follow the police act and code. And that is a detrimental thing. And it's something that needs to be practiced. And the only way we are going to follow the rule of law is when the police themselves practice it by themselves. And that is how we are going to move the nation forward. That is when we are going to solve all these problems in regards to anything that contravenes the human rights provisions.
Yeah, I will stay with you, Joshua. Now, your co-panelist mentioned something about leadership, which I would like to capitalize on. He said, when we look at the context of the political landscape on the African continent, you notice that during political campaigns or presidential campaigns, predecessors or say those that are vying for the top job, that is the presidency of every nation, most at times, or many times would do criticize their predecessors, or those that are already in power, say that the leader doesn't have a good vision for the country, and always give their own charter, which they intend to defend in the course of the period. When they get to power, you notice that sometimes they're being shifted away from this vision. Now, what accounts for that?
I'd attribute it to the regime that now has taken over power, trying to escape reality. It's trying to not own up for its misdoings. It's not owning up to its mistake. And one thing about leadership, if you don't take accountability, if you don't take responsibility of your actions, then you're doomed. The masses are not going to trust you. For instance, look at Kenya. Much as the president started on a high gear, and he had a very good plan, which I can say he still has a very good plan. But whenever he blames the previous regime, whenever he has the plan, you know, anything about the government, anything about leadership, especially with the president, everything, the buck stops with him. He is our signatory. He's the person whom the people look up to. Now, if he starts blaming the previous regime and not take action. For instance, why would you blame the previous regime of corruption? That some people in the previous regime were corrupt, or rather there was graft and everything, they pilfered resources. Why not bring in, much as they've brought in task forces to investigate all these matters, why not bring the perpetrators to book? Because you find these perpetrators are just walking out here doing their own stuff, and you're not arresting them, and then you blame the masses. So the leadership needs to stop politicizing the aspect of governance. They need to stop politicizing the aspect of corruption, pilfering resources. There needs to be system, because we do have good systems of governance. We do have systems that judicial systems. When these judicial systems are properly used, let's say it's supposed to be not a matter of personal affairs, but rather the country's affairs. So when the government is, especially now the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, prosecutes these people, I mean, that is when the country is going to move forward. But now when the government, especially led by the president, is trying to escape reality, there's going to, of course, to be an uprising. They're not going to trust him any longer. And these are called to many African leaders, especially leaders. They need to take a responsibility of their actions, that whenever there's a sight of corruption or everything, they need to step aside and let them get investigated until they are cleared, and all the perpetrators brought to book. And just as I've highlighted, we need to stop the aspect of politicizing these institutions. We need to stop politicizing corruption. That is the only way we are going to save our country and our continent of Africa.
Exactly, that is the way out. Now back to HILARY TITA. And a bit to proceed with today's conversation. Now, you're a political scientist. What is the phenomenon of politics in protest? And now looking at this concept, could protests on the African continent be regarded as a phenomenon to settle political scores?
You're very correct, Sharon. Very, very right. You know, one of the issues that leads to this police brutality is because the leaders are insecure. Protests often are a very fertile ground for oppositions to settle their scores with the ruling party. You know, the more the rubbishes the actions of the ruling party, the more good image they want to present to the citizens. The problem within the African continent, as I have always said, is that after the process of election, let every citizen come together, work together for the growth of the state. Every citizen here, the opposition inclusive, if actually they meant well for the state. But you find a situation where on the very first day that the ruling party steps into power, the opposition start criticizing their policies. They start criticizing every action that they take. These are the oppositions that call themselves the saints or the angels that redeem the people. I think that is the problem. When we talk about politicizing every institutions, we actually look at protests that have actually been political. The citizens are on the streets to demand for the construction of roads. The next thing, you start seeing varying demands coming from left, right. These are citizens that have been intoxicated or that have been influenced mostly by the opposition political parties within the state. So to some extent, it makes things difficult for the ruling party to handle. What is the next step? They order the police to crack down the protesters and bring back normalcy. Now, my co-panelists actually insisted on the issue of institutionalization, making strong institutions, leaving the institutions' functions on their own. It is true, but then these institutions are interconnected. Let me take, for example, the case of Cameroon. The governor of the region has command over the military, has command over the police force, that's the forces of law and order, the security forces. If there is a protest that has not been authorized within a particular region, that governor has the right to stop that protest. This is the reason we elected civilian rulers or leaders to power, so that they maintain peace and order. So one thing citizens must always equally understand is that not everybody buys into the ideology of protesting. But you find a situation where a group of people start a protest, whoever is not following what they want to do, they force them into protesting. You are trying to advocate for your right by equally infringing on the rights of another person. So you begin to see a situation where the citizens themselves, they are a problem into why protests turn violence, or the response from the police become violent. Because when you force someone to buy into your ideology, the police forces you to buy into the ideology of the state.
Exactly.
Because the state has an ideology, the regime in place has an ideology in place that drives them. I made the analogy. You may need water today, but the state has a 3-year strategic plan that they are focused on connecting all the regions of the state, all the counties or divisions of the state. You need water, you need internet. Mm-hmm. The state has a roadmap. So you kind of see the clash of ideologies there, the clash of demands, the clash of requests. So somebody have to follow the other. Should the state follow the citizens, then it will mean that they will have to provide water for community A, and then provide probably roads for community B, and all of that. Well, every regime has an ideology and a roadmap that they have in place to lead them. It becomes a problem when institutions have been politicized, as my co-panelists said, because when they are politicized, we now turn to have strong men rather than strong institutions, such that an individual, out of his or her institutional jurisdiction, would want to command another institution. And in this case, this is where in this case, we get to this point of protest and subsequently violent protest, where citizens, because in the globalized world, citizens are becoming more and more informed. They are becoming more and more knowledgeable about issues of politics. They are becoming more and more informed about their human rights, their political rights, their economic rights. So they step to the street. When they step to the street, these weak institutions that have been overpowered by strong men are unable to contend them. We will find ourselves in a situation where we fight ourselves, and when we start fighting ourselves, we get into the state of political decay, where the state loses control over her citizens. So I believe that making strong institutions is very important within present-day Africa, but we equally need strong men within those strong institutions.
Exactly.
Because if we have a strong president with a weak parliament, or the strong executive with a weak parliament, then checks and balance within the three arms of government will be very difficult. So to have those strong men, I go back to the responsibility of the citizens. Do they truly elect those who represent them in the parliament or at local councils? So you see that everyone is to be blamed with a state that is failing, and everyone is to receive the praises if the state is growing, because it takes the corporate responsibility of the citizens. So I think I will submit here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hilary. Now, to proceed with you, just to reiterate that, ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us, this is Talking Point of your Pan-African channel for you, Media Africa. We're discussing why or what is fueling protests across the African continent. Now, to proceed the conversation with you, Joshua, you listen to your co-panelists. And we mentioned in our preamble that some of the causes of protests across the African continent we cited issues like bad governance, economic crisis, high cost of living, energy crisis, amongst others. Now, in your opinion, what impact would these protests do have on the economic trajectory of the African continent, especially a country that is hit harshly with this protest?
Revert back by saying that a government that lives in threat of its citizens and would want to weaponize the police and military against its own people, it means that it's afraid. One, it's afraid. Two, there's something wrong that the government is doing, and they're in fear that they're going to be taken out or something. And it really shows that the extent to how the government hasn't been listening, hasn't been acting, and hasn't been proving what to the people, because literally people have lost confidence in it. Secondly, much as these institutions are interconnected, or let's say interdependent, the executive arm of government is not supposed to offer directives to the police or something. They're just overseeing operations of government. And that is why, for instance, in Kenya, the people who want to come out to the streets to protest, they just go to the officer of the commanding station, that is the head of police in a certain area or municipality, to just offer a notice, and the police are supposed to offer protection and escort as they go through the protest. They are not supposed to decline because, of course, it's entrenched in the Constitution. So when there's an uprising, that when the government decides to use the police against its own people, it means that the government is afraid of its own people. And definitely it shows that the people don't have confidence in the government. And the continuation of these, the culmination of these, will now proceed to having a lot of protests, having a lot of unrest. And of course, it would cause businesses, many of the business to shut, of course, because during the protests, a lot of business will be closed. People will not be coming to the streets, of course, especially the small and medium enterprises, to open their shops or something, because these are the people who are disgruntled and would be on the streets. So in turn, it would cause the economy to go down. Much as we've seen in Kenya, we're seeing that because most of our economy is grappled by business. And of course, the people who are going to suffer these brands are the same people who are on the streets. And of course, government would not really collect taxes because people are on the streets. So daily revenue would go down. It means that the government itself is going to experience a downturn. And for the government to try alleviate this, it means that it will have to go deeper and take more loans, and it would be a disadvantage to its own citizens. So look at this situation where a government would take loan, but the same citizens who were in problems or in turmoil would still pay off these loans. And I think this is where the question comes in. Are the debt that are being taken by our governments audited? And I think that is the reason why even in Kenya, most of the people on the streets, they want to demand answers. Who gave us these loans? This debt that we owe, how was it used? And if it was misappropriated, are the culprits brought to book? And how long are we going to pay this thing? How long are we going to pay this debt? So this is something that, and we have a generation that is very inquisitive, and it makes the government very uncomfortable. And you find that the same people who are in government don't have the moral compass to lecture us on corruption, because these are the same people who are there 3 governments before. For instance, when our second president was in power, these are the same people who were benefactors of this corruption. So they can't lead the corruption, the anti-corruption crusade, because themselves, they have their hands tied. And this is where we're living in a gridlock where, how are we going to solve this problem? We have a generation that is going, that is very inquisitive. Much as this generation is very hardworking, yes, these people would want to own their businesses and do their businesses and make their own money. But when you have unfavorable business environment, then they're going to close down. So there's no point of having a government closing you down or closing your business down, and yet yourself, even much as you're on the street, you can close down your business and champion for what is right. So in equal measure, the government is going to suffer in equal measure, but of course, the person who's going to suffer the brands really are the citizens of the country. That is the business owners, the employers, of course, the employees, and of course, the government. So it's a matter of give and take, definitely.
Definitely a matter of give and take, like you mentioned. Just to reiterate, that is Faithfulness Joshua, who is, of course, a youth activist who was joining us all the way from Kenya. Now, in a bit to proceed with you, HILARY, TITA, now you listen to your co-panelists. Let's look at it from a political point of view. Now, we are cognizant of the fact that protests do have an impact, not just on the economy, but equally on the balance of the political landscape. Now, how does protests, say the numerous protests we've had on the African continent, how they create an imbalance in the political landscape? In other words, how do they impact political instability across the nation, and how can that be corrected?
I will first of all start by saying that protests are not entirely bad. Of course, sometimes you need to shout for someone to hear. And that shouting means that you move on the street and demonstrate for your parliamentarians, for your leaders to take you serious. So I don't think they are entirely bad. But then the disadvantages are enormous, especially when they go violent. The very first disadvantage is that how many citizens are protesting? Let's say 1,000. If these 1,000 citizens were employees of a particular industry, how much would that particular industry lose in a single day because of a protest? That is how government should start seeing things, such that the people don't waste even a second protesting over things that they themselves would have seen, and then bring up policies to address them. The second thing is protests that go violent. when you have the National Assembly destroyed or a state building destroyed, that's a building that will take 6 months, 1 year to be constructed. It's been destroyed in a single day, to the detriment of who? The citizens, the leaders themselves, because everyone pays taxes. It is those taxes that they use to construct those buildings. In the course of protesting, the underpopulated continent loses their workforce, who are the youths, because these are mostly the people that the politicians will want to lure to the street to protest. The cause of protesting, for example, that of Kenya, I read that approximately 27 people have been killed. Do we know the worth of these 27 citizens that have been killed? Do we know if among these 27 was someone a leader who would have stepped up in the future to redefine economic policies of the African continent, to redefine security policies of the African continent, to redefine social policies of the African continent, or even a small community? Do we know the impact these people, these 27 people, citizens, would have created in their communities? When we ask ourselves all of these questions, we find out that first, from the position of leadership, there is no need to wait until the people step into the street and start protesting before you answer to their cause. In every society, there is an administrative machinery, from the central government right to the peripheral governments, or decentralized or deconcentrated collectivities. These decentralized collectivities or deconcentrated collectivities are the people that collect the desires of the people from the peripheries to the central government. When these desires have been collected, do the central government actually step in to debate on the desires, what the people urgently need, what the people are in dire need of? Do the central government debate on this? Or they wait until those people wait, and then step into the street to protest, then you start cracking down on them? From my previous contributions, I have been emphasizing on the responsibility of the citizens. But I want to equally make it categorically clear that the state has the major responsibility to cater for, or the government, sorry, has the major responsibility to cater for the state. The regime in place has the responsibility to provide economic security, to provide social security, political security to its citizens, so that whoever is into entrepreneurship can grow. Whoever is into politics should feel safe to practice politics. Whoever wants to valorize their culture should feel safe to valorize their culture. But we find a situation where leaders are always very insecure with their citizens. Even the citizens they claim that elected them, they are very insecure. A minister who wants to visit a local government area, they are well guarded. They are afraid to shake hands with their citizens. A mayor who is a local council head, who should be having frequent chats, frequent dialogue, frequent conversations with the citizens, is afraid to move around. Why should we find ourselves in that state if truly African as our whole democratic principles? I believe that the protests have a lot of disadvantages on the African continent, because the energy that we waste protesting on the street, some protests even lasting for weeks, months, the energy we waste on the street, if invested on productive things, will yield more and grow the African continent.
Exactly.
So I will want to really advise that the leaders shouldn't wait until citizens protest. When they cry, let the leaders listen.
Exactly.
Because if they don't listen, like Karl Marx once said, put it in his Communist Manifesto, there is a day that the proletariat, who are the majority, that they will subsequently rise up someday and overthrow the few bourgeoisies who think that they are powerful. So for the bourgeoisies who in this case are the leaders, to maintain their political power, let them give that common mother who lives in one remote village that opportunity to live free, do her trading freely, carry out her economic activities without heavy task, without disturbance or being embarrassed or being suppressed by the police or any other security force. Just provide this environment. The citizens will be free and the leaders themselves will be free. Thank you.
Staying with you, Hilary. Now, I got your point of view, and of course, would you share the opinion, because you mentioned something very pertinent, and it's because of protests we saw the ouster of the former Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir that was ousted there some years back, and the country, we can see where it is at the moment. Looking at this issue of protests on the African continent, do you agree that protests on the African continent can equally influence public opinion, government policies, or better still, what the continent upholds?
Asked President Ruto to withdraw the finance bill. You know, the citizens or the population have the greater power, in as much as they elect their leaders and give them that power to lead them. When the citizens rise, the leaders have to listen, because there is no amount of suppression, there is no amount of military force that can stop a populace that is determined to push forth an agenda. And so I go with President Ruto's song, let's have a conversation. Leaders should always have that conversation. It is very true, protest influences public policy or influences public opinion. But then, must we wait until protest? And one bad thing about protest is that it disrupts the flow of work of the regime in place. If a regime in place or the government in place had a 3-year strategic plan to electrify their community, a violent protest steps up, they will channel the resources that they were supposed to use to realize the electrification project into paying people, creating commissions to see how they can solve those protests. So you see the diversion of attention. So in that sense, you find out that public policies can be influenced when there is a protest. And it can not only be influenced positively, it can equally be influenced negatively. I can mention that resources that would have been used to continue building social amenities, to continue providing what the citizens want, they start creating commissions. They start creating committees that will handle the protests. So I believe that protests actually influences public opinion, it influences public policy, but then the influence may always even be negative as it drains our resources.
Exactly. Now to move to you, Faithfulness, and now you listen to your co-panelists, and we are gradually coming to the end of today's edition of the program. Now, in your opinion, given that protests could have the ability, like you mentioned, it could have a positive as well as negative impact on shaping public opinions as well as public policies. In your opinion, as a youth activist, how do you think that the governments can address this problem? Because we are looking at a way out of this protest on the African continent. Now, if the African continent has to address this issue of protests, what suggestions could be put on the table?
The governments in place, I think governments, especially led by the president, should understand that the masses, when they always get into power, they do have a lot of expectations. And often when these expectations are not satisfied, especially these young people, and especially citizens don't get satisfied with the government's takes or decisions, of course it gets tired, it gets weary. It's all about the government highlighting its government agenda, and of course try to get the masses, okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Please kindly proceed.
Okay. It's always about the government should be able to educate the masses. That is through civic engagement, okay? You find that most of the governments, especially the government of Kenya when it got into power, that is the current regime of the President Ruto, it didn't have the favor of the media itself. So you find that the media would spread propaganda or something, and that is something that would be sold easily to a typical citizen. A typical citizen is one person who is who always reacts to emotions. They don't react to logic. So it's all about the government to package its information, package its communication. And even the president himself highlighted that his communication had failed because it was out of touch with reality. And that is the reality of things. And it's about time that the government really needs to try to restore its trust to its citizens. And by doing so, it's acting up by the demands that the citizens are making, that let there be proper governance, let there be let the corrupt be expunged and be, of course, prosecuted. So it's always about, the buck always stops with the government. And one thing for sure I can tell you, when the government decides to do things because it has systems, then things are going to work. But when it doesn't work, then people fall short, or rather do not trust the government any longer. So the whole this plight is all about the government trying to earn the trust of the people, and it's acting itself together, collecting itself together, and the people who are in government to dedicate their time, dedicate their effort to try earn the trust of these people. Another thing I'd really highlight, of course, is with the citizen itself. Much as the citizen, the role of an active citizen is keeping the government in check. Most of these questions always get unanswered. Most of these questions that emanate from the citizens are never really addressed. So it's a point of government should be able to address this situation. And I think the government should stop the aspect of politicizing this situation, that, oh, it's the opposition sponsoring this thing, that the opposition never wanted us to do 1, 2, 3 or so stuff. It's the role of the government to educate the masses that, look, this is how it's going to benefit you. This is the plan that we have for you for this year, for the medium term and for the long term, such that even if you're out of power, it's going to benefit you all. So the government should stop politicizing agendas, stop politicizing projects, because literally it's the taxpayers who have funded these projects. It's the taxpayers who are going to pay these loans that are used to fund these projects. So it's the representatives in power. Let me call them leaders. I don't only like calling them leaders. They are representatives. Even myself, when I'm going to get there, I'm going to be representative. So it means that it's always about the willing of the representative to represent the interest of its own people. And they should stop politicizing the matter as if they're doing the favor to its own citizens or something. The citizens just want a free life, a life full of dignity, a life full of a situation where they're able to handle their business and go on with their own affairs. So it's always about the free will of the government to be able to have serve the interest of its own citizens. It doesn't matter whether the citizens voted for them or not. It's the purpose of the government. That is why the president, even yesterday in his speech, he said that he has a job. Even much as many of us are going to come out on the street, he has a job, and that is his own duty. And he's going to have opposition. And the only thing that is able to win him out or win these masses and earn the trust of them is by him proving himself that, look, this is what I'm able to do, and having a conversation, because the moment he just stays in State House and believes that his advisors and the people who massage his ego are just offering him information, because as a president, of course, he needs to listen to the people. And when he stops listening to the people, he's going to fall short. And the people who are advising him and the people who are close to him would really not highlight the plight of the citizens, because they are close to power. And mostly those who are close to power always think that they're so delusional that they think they wield the power themselves. So it's all about the advisors getting, and of course the institutions that are in power, that is the National Intelligence Service that's supposed to collect information, to really brief the president on how the situation is on the ground. Let there be data that is on the ground, let it be interpreted, and let it not be mistaken for politics. There's a big difference between politics and governance, and that is one call that we have been asking our president and, of course, our governments to really dissect and refrain from merging politics into governance. When they politicked and got into power, they got these positions. Of course, it was politics, but when it was time to act, that is governance. And when we champion for governance, it's never about politics. Even us, maybe who would have voted for that government, are still asking for the same governance because it cuts across. So that is the plight that really needs to be addressed and really needs to be worked on effectively for the betterment of our future generations and, of course, for us.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Joshua, for that brilliant one. Back to you, Hilary. In a bit to wrap up today's edition, in your perspective as a political scientist, looking at the context of the African continent, what is the way forward?
Strengthening democratic institutions. This is the fundamental point. You know, Winston Churchill once said that democracy is the worst form of government except for other forms of government that have been tried from time to time. This is simply saying that democracy remains the best form of government. After the 1990s, when with the collapse of the Soviet war, most countries became democratized. Even China today, who have been very resistant, now have a kind of a funny political system, democracy in a communist system. So you find out that democracy remains the best form of government. Now, democracy means, one, the voice of the people, legitimacy of what the government is doing. Are they acting out of space, or they are truly representing the people? When the citizens vote, parliamentarians, when they elect their leaders, they mandate them and they trust them with the power to, in turn, do carry out state policies which could not be done by individuals. The second tenet of democracy is the rule of law. This is the most important, which is lacking in most states on the African continent. You find a situation where, like I said before, we have strong individuals ruling weak institutions. Remember, institutions here are simply laws. They are not physical. There are laws that the parliament created to create those institutions. Now the legislative arm is created. with defined rules to carry out oversight on the executive arm, to question ministers, to question the president. But instead of things happening as they are supposed to be, you find a situation where the executive overweighs on the parliament. And to some extent, even some of the laws that were created at the advent of independence on the African continent, somehow, they are archaic. Because you will not find a situation where the executive arm is given so much power that they can dissolve the legislative arm at will. The second tenet of democracy is to uphold law, the rule of law. The third is to respect human rights. The government should not always feel that the citizens are mad. Of course, humanity is as diverse as nobody can comprehend. This should mean that within a particular society, ideas must not match each other. They must not be the same. And so the government should always give a listening ear to their citizens.
Thank you. Thank you so much. HILARY, TITA, TEBIT, political scientist, joining us all the way here from Cameroon for your introduction and as well a contribution on today's edition of the program. I equally acknowledge your faithfulness, Joshua, who joined us all the way from Kenya. Meanwhile, thank you so much for your contribution on today's edition. It's on that note, ladies and gentlemen, and that we draw down the curtains of today's edition of Talking Point over your Pan-African channel. And thank you for being through with us. Today we're discussing what is fueling protests across the African continent. We believe you learned a lot from today's exchange. And meanwhile, we'll leave you in company of our numerous programs.